councillors, we're about to start the meeting now. Thank you, and welcome to those on Zoom. I'm just wondering, we've got the first thing is apologies from Māngai Te Ua. Are there any other apologies that we know of? Sing out.
Mr. Chair, I just text you a secret message for the reason why, so don't say it on camera. It's a bit embarrassing. So I just have to leave just before 11. It'll be about 30-40 minutes.
Look, I can't see a secret message from you or any message.
Oh, okay.
Oh, was that public one you sent?
You sent it to the wrong Dave.
Oh, no, I text you.
No.
We all want to know what the reason is now.
Yeah, no.
Tell us what it is, mate.
It's all right, I'll tell you guys after Angela's left.
It's like transport incident yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, so apologies from Māngai for Te Ua for the day, and Councillor Angela for early departure. And
I'll be back.
Yeah, okay, for a short-term absence due to a secret text, I mean. If there's none others, I'll move they be received. Those apologies accepted, I should say, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Those in favour, against, carried. Confirmation of the agenda. Councillors, I don't have any proposed changes to the run sheet that we have in front of us or emailed to us. Perhaps just at this, I'll move the agenda be confirmed as is, seconded by Councillor Robb. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Just so for the record, maybe we'll say who's in the room and who's on Zoom, just to help everyone. So present in the room, I'll read that out, and if you can do Zoom, Amy. We've got myself, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Donovan, Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Pascoe. Not aware of any others that are coming in to the room.
I do not believe I have anybody else joining via the room. And on Zoom, I have Councillor Hamilton, Mayor Southgate, Councillor Bunting, Councillor Naidu Ralph, Māngai Whetū, Councillor Van Oosten, Councillor O'Leary.
Good morning.
And Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Okay.
I think nobody else has moved orders.
All right, that appears to be the sum total of everybody who's there. Do we have any declarations of interest? If not, I'll move through that. Do we have any public forum, Amy?
We have no public forum.
Notified of anyone? Okay, none of that. That's good. Confirmation of the Strategic Growth Committee minutes of the 15th of February, moved by Councillor Wilson. I'll second. Are there any queries relating to that? Any issues arising? If not, I'll put the resolution that those be accepted as true and correct record. Those in favour raise their hands. Aye. And we've got everyone, yep. And those against, no. Okay, so it's all carried. Gee, we're going swimmingly here. Okay, councillors, moving on to item 6, the Chair's report. So firstly, apologies for lateness, but I suspect in this committee it's always going to be late because of with the amount of things that we have happening, including a meeting on Monday this week that I didn't want to do a report until we'd had that meeting relating to the growth issues. And it's just the fact that we need to get the reports done more than a week in advance makes it impossible for the reports to be up to date. So I chose to try and be a little bit up to date there. It did come out yesterday. I'd hoped it'd be a day earlier, so sorry about that last day. But councillors, this is not really raising any new issues, but just highlighting some of the issues that are coming to us in the meeting later today. So I'd prefer that if you saved your questions on the issues that are coming up later today to those issues when they're in the agenda. But if it's anything to do with the process or the stuff I've got up at the top there, by all means, questions and comments are welcome. So the floor is open. If there are any, if there aren't. Sorry, Rob, Councillor Rob.
Just a couple. I like your technique on delivering the chair's report. I might adopt that one going forward myself, given the obstacles I had with mine on Tuesday. But I just wondered, Chair Dave, whether the first line of the second paragraph, due to the depressed annual plan meeting schedule, should be depressing.
Well,
given that we're not there yet.
I think I could stand that correction. Yes, I was certainly depressed. So,
and still depressing.
Yes, yeah, I think that's probably more accurate than my word. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other useful comments like Rob's? Councillor Sarah.
Not as witty as Rob's. I was just going to say that I want to support your comments around the Metro Spatial Plan and the transport element of that we're working on at the moment, and its critical role in determining where growth goes, and I'm looking forward to us getting some more clarity around that over the next month or two.
Well, certainly it's coming up in the agenda, and I think it's not the only time, as you've pointed out, that we'll be discussing that in the near future. And perhaps one comment about all of these items that are mentioned here, while they're coming up today, that's more for updates today, but there's going to be decision making needed within the next 3 months on all of those. So please do your best to get your head round them. And please also make sure you approach staff directly for further explanations. And if you need to find out who the right people, I'm happy to help, but if you may know them anyway. But we're going to have some pretty critical decisions arriving on our table pretty much all at once, I suspect, or within the next 2 meetings of this committee and of council during that period. If there's no other questions, can't see anything on Zoom, I'll move that the report be received, seconded by Councillor Ryan. Anyone want to speak to that? If not, no. I'll put that, though. Raise your hands in favour. Against, that's carried. Thanks very much. Item 7, the Metro Wastewater detailed business case. Jackie, I bet you didn't think you were going to be on this early.
It's nice to be at the beginning and not the end.
Yeah. Don't count on it too often. The floor is yours, thanks, Jackie. Sorry, that's on page 13 that starts.
Kia ora koutou. Chair Dave's comments around this really being an update session as a precursor to some of the big decisions that will be brought in front of you soon certainly applies to this project. So the purpose of this project is really just to update you on the progress that we've made with the overall project, both the southern detailed business case and the northern detailed business case, to really remind you of the work that's been done over the last 18 months. So this project commenced in June 2020, and most of the key decisions have been made along the way of delivering the project. You will know that there have been some delays in sort of going over the last few hurdles in terms of lining up meeting dates with people who have very, very busy schedules. So we've finally landed a date for the project governance group. Do you all have the sort of couple of slides that were prepared just to summarise the key points of the presentation?
It's Blair here. Can you get Tyler to share that, please?
Carmen today.
Tyler's online.
Carmen.
Oh, Tyler's online.
Tyler.
You're really trying to confuse us now, or me anyway.
Multitasking
I'm
today.
easily confused.
So,
Except when it comes to Councillor Wilson, I'm very clear there.
It's the Metro Wastewater project, Tyler. But in those couple of slides, I've just drawn out the key points in the paper, which are really that the project governance group meeting has been set down for the 29th of April. And at that meeting, the final Southern Metro detailed business case will be presented for approval. Like I said, there's no major material decisions to be made. All of those have been made along the way. The draft MOU to support implementation.
Sorry, can we go back to those slides, Tyler? That would sort of was bit too much, sorry, Jackie.
No, ka point.
A bit too much once over lightly. I was halfway through the first line. Slow reader.
Computers basically crash, so if you don't mind, just continue talking
okay.
and I'll get back up as soon as I can.
So at the 29th of April, hui, we will be presenting the final draft detailed business case for the Southern Metro area for approval by the governance group, project governance group. And we will also be presenting the draft memorandum of understanding to that group for consideration and endorsement prior to coming to the respective council organisations and iwi partners for their approval. Following the 29th of April governance group hui, we are working hard to arrange a combined briefing for all of the partners so that everyone's getting an overview of the project, of the detailed business case and the content of the MOU together. And we're also working hard to try and organise a deep dive for this committee and council prior to that material coming to the next Strategic Growth Committee meeting in May.
Jackie, just that deep dive for us, can we not just work hard but say that it's essential to have one for our council, I think, before we go to a combined one?
That would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think just maybe we can make a note that there will be something arranged for us so that we can get our heads around it before we give it to everyone else.
Yep.
Thanks.
As a reminder, the preferred Southern Metro servicing solution involves a standalone Cambridge wastewater treatment plant and a new Southern wastewater treatment plant to meet the immediate needs of the airport and that surrounding area and the medium to long-term needs of Hamilton as well, alongside Puketi. So planning investigations for delivering that new Southern plant are commencing in parallel with completing the project, because there is some urgency and some opportunity that presents itself right now around really driving that forward, which we'll pick up in the GM's PX report. And just as an update, the Northern Metro Wastewater DBC is also progressing well. There's some updates on the work that's been done in the report, which I won't go into. I'll leave that to you to read. But it is still programmed for completion by June 2022. The cost estimates for that work are being reviewed and will be presented to the committee on the 19th of May as well. So that's just an overview of what's in the paper. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, councillors, questions on this? Sarah, it looks like it's not. Oh, sorry, it's not showing. I must be. What am I not looking at here? Okay, I had the wrong screen on here. My apologies. Rob, thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jackie, for the report. Reading the report, I get the feeling that we started the journey with a view that we would be potentially funding about 40% of the business case and whatever infrastructure was needed, subject to agreement on that infrastructure. Reading between the lines now, I get the view that we may be asked to fund 80%. And we've made provision in the long-term plan, as I understand, for an estimate of 40%. Are we likely to be in a position to fund 80%?
What's been agreed through the process of developing the DBC are some principles around funding. So the MOU will capture those principles, but it's really in agreeing the funding with Waipa and Waikato District that will be nailed down. The principles that are included in the DBC and in the MOU, there are three options really. One relates to the proportion of flow that the plant will service, both in the long term, so out to 2061, and for some of the nearer term investments, sort of taking it on a case-by-case basis. When we when we informed the LTP, the emerging preferred option that had been identified was a centralised or sub-regional facility to service both Cambridge and parts of Hamilton, you might recall. And the proportion that we calculated, in sort of broad terms calculated, there's no clear formula, was based on Cambridge coming in. So that's where the 40% came from. So with Cambridge coming in and the assumptions that were made around the extent of Hamilton that would be serviced, and through discussions with Waikato District Council, the agreed split for LTP funding purposes was 40-40-20. As we've worked through the project, the preferred solution, as you know, has determined that Cambridge will have a standalone plant, which means that Waipa's flow coming to that southern plant is much lower, in the long term, is much lower than what we assumed for the LTP. So on that basis, based on the projections we're using at the moment, Hamilton's contribution to the consenting land purchase, if we take that very simple flow proportion basis, is around 80%.
Right.
Yeah. What's been included in the LTP, as you might recall, is really funding for the consenting and land purchase components only.
Yep.
So not actually constructing the plant.
Not the construction.
But you're correct in your read of the report.
Yeah. So the other 20% will come from Waikato District Council or Waipa District Council?
Primarily, if we take the proportional flow approach,
Yep.
primarily from Waipa District. Waikato District's flow proportion into the plant is very low, based on the assumptions that we've made, which is really just the reticulated parts of Matangi and the Tamahere Business Hub coming in. That could change in the future. So, we need to make sure that the MOU and funding agreements are principle-based, because the demands that may go to the plant will change depending on, what happens in terms of growth.
Okay, and am I correct in, and I don't know which report I read it in, am I correct in assuming that neither Waipa nor Waikato have included in their long-term plans funding for this project, whether it's land purchase, infrastructure, business case costs, or whatever?
Yeah, the business case has been co-funded by all three partners. Hamilton City are definitely the major contributor, but Waipa District and Waikato District have contributed to both the northern and the southern detailed business cases. You're correct in your recollection of previous reports that we are the only council that's actually funded a contribution to the southern plant. Waipa didn't fund anything around the southern plant through the LTP. Waikato made a note of it, a $4 million contribution, but it didn't get funded. So they'd noted it in the LTP, but it wasn't funded.
Okay, and so you might not want to answer this question, but do you, in terms of all the work that you've been doing, and really good work that you've been doing, do you get a sort of an appetite that it's still very, very difficult to get our neighbouring councils really committed to sharing some infrastructure costs in the water space? Are we continuing on this road with an optimistic view that they're all coming to the table, and indeed they're not? Yeah, feel free to say you don't feel like answering the question, but it is one that continues to concern me.
Oh, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed amongst the council partners, really, as we move into trying to confirm funding agreements and really stepping into the next phase of implementation, which is where we're at right now. The time for those conversations is now.
Thank you.
Councillor Rob, I wonder if Jackie might just talk about the scenario of Entity B, Three Waters also comes into fruition, because I think this is also quite relevant in that context, Jackie.
Yeah, sure, Blair.
But it's only a proposal at the moment, isn't it, Entity B? I guess what we're doing here is actually making, and we'll be asked, as Chair Dave said, in the next 3 months, to make some sort of decision on us continuing, with this particular project. But I understand your comments, Blair. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I've got Ewan next, then Ryan's disappeared off it, then it'll be Sarah, then Mayor Paula.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Councillor Rob actually asked my question, which was, so thank you for the explanation. Just remind me, and I don't know why my mind's gone blank, just remind me about the Three Waters debate and how it touches this entire project in terms of, you know, ultimately if Three Waters proceeds, these wastewater infrastructures would move to Entity B, would they not? Or have I misunderstood that?
That's my understanding. There's probably others on the call who might be able to, you know, provide more certainty, but that's certainly my understanding. Is the I guess the strategic direction that we set for the Waikato sub-region would inform decisions that Entity B would make.
Right. And in light of that, and in light of what Rob has highlighted, it's a scenario where Hamilton ratepayers would be funding the upfront costs substantially, and then that would all just get gobbled into Entity B. Is that right?
It would be along with any other water assets. Are you talking about capital or the ongoing costs?
Well, both because we're being asked. There's certainly an OPEX component to this, all the staff time and expertise.
Yep.
And we're about to be confronted with a CapEx.
Which we have in the LTP. You're talking about that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the two, and so I'm just reflecting on the fact that we will have done that, and then it will all be transferred in theory to Entity B. Yep. And there's an irony in the fact that those other partners in Entity B who haven't contributed. I'm just trying to get my head around.
I guess our asset would be valued more because we've contributed that, as opposed to the others.
Well, that's the critical question. Yeah. Can staff
I'm just trying to home in what you're trying to get out of it. Sorry.
Yes, look, I accept that I haven't articulated the question as well as I had wanted to. Thank you for that focus. So I guess that's the question. Can we somehow ring fence everything and anything we're doing in this area, now or in the future, before Three Waters appears, that we can clearly identify as needing to be calculated in the value of our assets?
Jackie, have you got a comment on that about how we're recording the contribution, I guess, capital particularly, but also any OPEX?
So I guess all of the work that's going in to deliver the detailed business cases has been funded through both operational funding from council, so we keep track of our time costs, and through stimulus funding. So that's where Hamilton, Waikato and Waipa have really found the cash to fund the completion of both detailed business cases is through that stimulus funding. My understanding is that all of the capital costs that are associated with strategic wastewater and water systems can be ring-fenced, but there will be others like Andrew Parsons who are, I guess, more able to answer that with certainty, given that everything's moving at the moment, so as certain as we can be. I think that this sort of project and the scale of investment that will be required to really make it happen is an example of, I guess, the funding challenges that local government do have. And so one could argue, that if funding solutions are provided, it provides more potential for this sort of project to be delivered.
Sure. But
I think Ewan was approaching it from the already spent amounts. Are we going to have them valued and recorded in such a way that that we get some benefit at the point of transfer to a new entity,
Councillor Dave,
as opposed to ones that haven't given the benefit?
Correct.
Councillor Dave and Councillor Ewan, my understanding, Blair here online, my understanding is that this project is debt funded. So the $9 million in their LTP is a debt funded capital item. And councillors will recall that as part of the Three Waters proposal, councils for any debt that's associated with Three Waters would be reimbursed by the new entity. So effectively, Councillor Wilson, if council were to acquire the land and obviously borrow the money for that, if Entity B was established, that debt would be in effect repaid to council when the entity was established. So That's how I understand the entity finances would work in terms of the assets and entity transfer across the entity. The other part to this is that there is a view that entity B may be looking for a range of opportunities to move quickly to demonstrate good asset planning and good solutions in a cross-boundary manner. This particular project and having this project advanced certainly would put it as a strong contender for entity B to look at in terms of delivering integrated cross-boundary solutions for a high growth area. So that is why the advice is to keep progressing this project, because it's certainly, as Jackie said, needed. And in addition, entity B may in fact provide the pathway to navigate working in a cross-boundary situation, because its mandate is to look across an area not restricted by particular individual council boundaries.
Blair, I don't necessarily disagree with what you've just said, but I would have thought, in terms of what is definitely needed and in the best interest of our ratepayers, is the Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant. I'm less concerned because I don't represent the people of Cambridge. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that we're not making current decisions that have a financial consequence to our ratepayers on the basis that we've already determined that Three Waters and its mega entity B format is going to come into play, just in case if it doesn't. If that makes sense,
Well,
It does.
Asking whether we need it either way.
Yes.
So I think Jackie can respond more to that, but certainly this project started before the whole Three Waters reform, and it was driven by a need for the metro area, and our position hasn't changed. And in fact, the need is increasing every day for this project to advance in the manner that it's showing.
Yeah, and it might be helpful if we did say, make our comments on this particular project, whether it's needed or not, and that we have established that we're going to record the contribution and recoup. Well, that's our plan, is to recoup that as well. I think that's been part of, Rob,
add to the conversation. I'm aware of Councillor Ewan's concerns about a lot of our OPEX cost and continuing to work on projects. And I have previously spoken with Stephen Hallowell as well as Tracy about how we go about recording, say, Jackie's time on this. Yeah. Because my argument has always been, well, if the government are going to mandate and tell us what to do, we may as well sit on our hands and do nothing at all and incur no costs at all for our ratepayers. But they are keeping a record of these costs, but whether the DIA will ultimately reimburse us is still questionable when they come in to do their audit.
And I don't want to go past the fact that we are keeping a record, and we will attempt to do that there. Other stuff is another question for another time.
All right. Thank you.
Jackie, did you have any more comments on that particular issue?
I guess just, if I may, the detailed business case, as Blair said, was started before reforms was a thing, and so the detailed business case document itself will be completed in the vein that it started, which is based on BAU in terms of structure.
Although, Mr Chair, I do comment that originally the business plan and some of our thinking for the longest time was based on the Southern Wastewater Plant and not Cambridge having their own standalone.
That was an early option either way that swung backwards and forwards at least twice, Ewan, and you might originally Cambridge was in it, then it was out of it, but there were several iterations while Cambridge, there was a timing issue because Cambridge had to get theirs online earlier than anyone else needed an upgrade. So Jackie, do you want to maybe background the Cambridge involvement aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as you might recall, we started with a long list of options, and we've gone through a robust process to evaluate those options and really drill down to a shortlist and ultimately a preferred option. The shortlist certainly had the option of a larger sub-regional facility south of Hamilton for both Cambridge and parts of Hamilton and the airport area. As we got deeper into, I guess, the capacity of Pukete, the potential costs of upgrading Hamilton City's strategic conveyance network to shift flow to Pukete, it became quite clear that Pukete with upgrades, so significant investment is still required at Pukete, and you'll hear about that in May, has enough space to accommodate the needs of Hamilton City, based on the projections that we've used, out to around 2040 to 2060, depending on which growth curves we use. On top of that, as Chair Dave has said, Cambridge needed to make decisions immediately. And so we went through a revisit of our evaluation, and the preferred option was determined to still involve a new sub-regional facility, but without Cambridge. And some of the advantages of the preferred solution include the fact that it's flexible and can adapt to demand as it occurs, as opposed to needing to invest several tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in a new plant immediately. So that was one of the drivers. The other driver was really that Pukete, based on the work that we've done, has enough space to accommodate our needs, out for at least the next 20 to 30 years. And so that's a big investment to make in a new plant for Hamilton that we might not need for some decades. So those are the key drivers that sat behind the preferred solution being identified as what it is.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah, then Paula, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackie. It's been really helpful listening to the back and forth there. You've given us a bit of a spoiler for the 19 May meeting around the Pukete wastewater treatment plant costs. In terms of that increase, are you able to say what kind of, range we're looking at the moment?
I would prefer not to.
Okay.
So we are getting the cost estimates peer reviewed.
Right.
I guess if we look at the long-term plan in terms of what's been budgeted for Pukete towards the back end of the 10-year plan, I think it's around 140 million.
Yeah.
And what's also in the long-term strategy was, I guess, the assumption that we would be building a very large plant in the south, so another 240 million beyond the next 10 years. I guess as we move through our consenting process, we'll get more certainty on the costs, but I will say that it's significantly higher than what's in the current LTP. When we, I guess one of the commitments or agreements that have come through the detailed business case process is really in relation to minimum performance standards and really delivering best for river outcomes. And so for a plant like Pukete, which is, I guess, the largest municipal wastewater treatment plant discharging to a freshwater environment in the country, that has big implications in terms of the technology change that's needed, but also the fact that we need to keep that plant running well and compliant while we're doing that technology change. So I'd rather, I guess, brief you in a workshop than share that today.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll wait for that workshop. In terms of the change from 40% to 80% share, so we originally budgeted 9.3 million in the long-term plan for the land and consenting costs. Are we looking at a doubling of that now, or will it be even more in terms of, are we looking at escalations of land price now, and how is that, and is that a decision that can wait until the next LTP, or are we going to have to make that sooner to avoid, I guess, escalations, happening even more in the meantime?
There are, we're seeing the impact of escalation in terms of resource cost as well, already, sorry. So the estimates that we'd included for consenting and designations for the plant, we've revisited in the LTP, we've revisited as part of our project planning process, and that's increased. I've noted that in the paper. When it comes to the cost of land, we've made some assumptions around what the cost might be, and we really do need to get into the process of identifying particular sites, getting proper valuations for those sites. We'll cover this in PX, so might leave that till then.
If we can hold that particular strand.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
I think that was it at this stage, so thanks.
Thanks. As we've said, we'll come back to that particular part of the issue. Mayor Paula, thanks. Sorry to wait so long.
No, that's fine, thank you. I've been listening with interest, and Dave, you know that I've been alongside this process with you for some time. Jackie, I think, is it fair to say with it was the whole economics around the Southern Wastewater plant did change when Cambridge, looking at their own delayed investment into Cambridge and Te Awamutu, made the decision they did with the Cambridge plant, which, as you say, changed all those proportions of benefit. At that moment, going that way was what drove up some of the prices for us, future prices for us.
I think there's two parts to an answer to that question. I guess the first is the fact that Cambridge will service its own needs certainly means that the proportion that Waipā will contribute to the southern plant, based on the assumptions that we've made, has reduced. So that's clear. The second part is, I guess, the fact that Cambridge is standalone means that the investment needed in the southern plant is nowhere near as large as what had originally been included in the options assessment. So I guess Waipā District will need to spend, I'm expecting over $100 million on the Cambridge plant, but what that means is we don't need to, I guess, jump right into building a very large sub-regional plant closer to Hamilton.
Thanks. So I'm also interested in not just the actual plants, the cost of construction and completion of wastewater assets or wastewater treatment assets. I'm also interested in the economic value of those assets vis-a-vis the fast growth that we're experiencing to the south around the airport precinct, the ability to, like you said, offload some of the pressure on Pukete and allow other development, Rotokauri, North Hamilton, into that space. I think this question might be for you, Blair. Do we, when we're talking about water investment, do we factor in the economic benefit? And do we factor in the point that we found before, that developer being in time for development? So we know there are half a dozen developers out there who want to come into the city, want to get their land rezoned for development, all of that kind of thing that's going on out there. The airport has plans. They would have to do a bespoke water treatment plant, wouldn't they? All of that's relevant. So do we, when we factor in, do these reports on the future costs of water, do we factor in economic value? Because I'd imagine Waipā would economically benefit from activity around the airport precinct.
Jackie, do you want to answer that first? I mean, that's part of the business case.
Yep, I'll start, Blair. So we do factor it in. We don't quantify that in dollar terms, in terms of some cost-benefit analysis, but it's certainly one of the elements that goes into identifying the preferred solution, providing servicing certainty to existing development, but also the opportunity that it presents going into the future.
Thank you. So look, to be blunter about it, and just to rephrase part of the question, so the years that you gave for Pukete, which are a reasonably way out now that the load's been taken off, Cambridge load coming in has been taken off. However, do we expect all the growth, the people willing and ready to grow the southern part of Hamilton to wait that long before we need to put that wastewater plant in? I'm not trying to make it a loaded question, Blair, but you understand the pressures that are coming on in that geography. And while we may not need it, capacity-wise, we may need it to unlock opportunity.
Look, I think the questions, Mayor Paula, today from all elected members have been actually excellent. And I guess what I would say here is it's really, really important for a high-growth metro like Hamilton to continue to plan strategically for the long term for our three waters infrastructure, irrespective of NTDB. And I think, as Jackie has said, this project started before those conversations, and as a high-growth area, and we know there's growth pressures right around the city, and the reports today expand on that. It's critically important we think about that long-term planning for the city, and that if NTDB does eventuate, we can pass over those plans and robust thinking and work with them to advance those quickly. But irrespective, Hamilton is going to need future wastewater capacity, and we're going to need to think about that now, which is exactly what this business case is about. And as we well know, we need to acquire land earlier than later, because it's a critical critical part of any solution. So, Mayor Paula, your questions around economic value and the long-term prosperity of the area are fundamental to this work. We know that if we don't have wastewater solutions identified, our ability to work and think long-term in terms of land use and growth is compromised. And so that goes to the very heart of your question. There's a significant economic prosperity element, but there's also a significant environmental and Te Ture Whaimana aspect to this as well. We know that the obligations and the need to treat wastewater to a high standard is there, and we need to plan for that. And this business case is fundamentally all about that, but also fundamentally linked up with our future-proof and Metro Spatial Plan long-term land use planning.
Just in terms of the future costs in the broad sense, we know we've got $200 million shortfall stormwater coming into years 11 to 13 of our long-term plan, which of course nobody cares about at the moment because they can't see that. But in terms of the future costs, it'd be fair to say there's some pretty enormous investments coming unless government comes in alongside us to pay for that infrastructure, help pay for that infrastructure. Is that right?
That is correct, and Jackie and Chris may wish to just elaborate on that, but certainly it's substantially higher than what's identified at the present time in our LTP. But Jackie or Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, that's correct, Blair, and I think coupled with the investment that will be needed at Pukete, that just compounds that particular issue. I might just come back to your question, Mayor Paula, around adapting to the growth needs and aspirations of the metro area. I think that's one of the benefits of the preferred option is it's been conceptualised based on staging, but those stages have triggers. So if there was a desire to open up more land faster, then you would revisit your staging and bring, future stages forward. One of the first initial tasks that we want to include in the project delivery implementation phase is really to revisit those population projections that we've used for the southern plant.
Sorry, Paul, are you okay there?
Yeah, I am. Thank you. Thanks, Chair Dave.
Okay, Chris, did you have anything else to add? You were nominated by Blair as being an answerer to that last bit.
I'm not by the mic, but I'm just going to say
Yes,
yes.
he agrees.
All right, happy with that answer. That's short and sweet.
Yeah. Maxine, thank you.
Kia ora, and greetings from Zoom land. Thank you, Jackie, for your answers today. And my read of the paper, along with Councillor Rob, is that there'll be potentially two treatment systems in the south of Hamilton. One with the major ownership of Hamilton and the other in the Waipa area. And that your last answer around the staging leads me to think, are there other options that have been considered from the Hamilton perspective in being able to use potentially some of the capacity that might be available in the Waipa project, given that that will be on stream much earlier than what we're talking about in our Hamilton district, and I guess alongside of that, should a water entity be in our future, would that entity be considering two large projects quite close to each other and prioritise both? Large question, but I guess related.
I'll answer the easier question, the first question, around did we consider the potential for the Cambridge plant to service parts of Hamilton? The answer is yes. We did look at the potential to site a sub-regional facility in Cambridge as part of the long list assessment, and that was discounted for a number of reasons. I think it's important for everyone to understand that the cost of conveyance, so the cost of shifting wastewater, is very, very high, not only in terms of capital cost, but ongoing operational cost and energy consumption and the like. And that's often often forgotten is the cost of conveyance is significant. So that was considered. I will also mention that Te Awamutu also has its own standalone facility. So it's not just the Cambridge plant, and they are some distance from us. So it's not unusual in a metro area or a broader sort of sub-regional area to have smaller plants in sort of satellite communities. To your second question around prioritisation, that's a bit crystal ball gazing, but I think that the work that we have done and the way that we've done it in terms of trying to deliver boundaryless solutions that deliver the best outcomes for our communities collectively and for our environment really speaks to, in my view, where we should be going in terms of the strategic decisions that we're making around wastewater servicing and other water servicing, irrespective of the outcomes of any reforms.
Thanks, Jackie. There's probably many more questions, but in the interest of time, I'll give it back to the meeting.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, councillors. I have allowed a bit more of a workshopy situation because I really feel this would have been better to have gone, to be honest, to a workshop first rather than to a committee at this point, because it's been a good discussion and we needed a sort of a to and fro type discussion actually to help tease out some things. I have a couple of points or questions I want to ask about. One's the Fonterra Dairy Factory and the Hautapu Industrial Development Area. Is it proposed that all of that might go to the new Cambridge plant in terms of their wastewater? Because I noticed that Fonterra has got quite a bit of opposition. I think they've been initially got some extra hurdles more than they probably wanted into. They've got appeals, I think, from local community down there against their own plant in that area.
Yeah, so as part of the long list options assessment, we did consider Fonterra Hautapu servicing, as you know. The option of basically Fonterra Hautapu having a standalone facility versus it going to Cambridge, or the sub-regional solution. Yeah. So those were on the table early in the piece, and through our evaluation process, that option was discounted, the idea of bringing Fonterra Hautapu into a municipal facility. On the back of that work and other work that Fonterra had done, they have pursued a new discharge consent and enabling consents for a new wastewater treatment plant at Hautapu. That consent has been granted, and I'm not up to the play in terms of the state of appeals, but they've gone through the hearing process and a decision has been made to grant their consents. And
the new industrial areas, I mean, for instance, Future Proof has a proposal in front of it right now to enlarge the current industrial footprint, which is already larger than the built area.
Yeah, so the non-Fonterra industrial area would be serviced through the Cambridge plant.
Okay. And Cambridge as a town or small city is now growing faster proportionally even than Hamilton. How future-proofed is the Cambridge plant? Because I understand that's relatively constrained geographically, the area it's got. I mean, if they grow to the 23,000 population, if they grow to 50,000 in 25 years' time, is that future-proofed enough, or are they going to need to come to our southern plant anyway?
Oh, that's a great question. Based on the assumptions that they've made around growth, they expect that their existing site footprint, which is very large because they've got rapid infiltration beds there at the moment, so large areas where they dispose into the ground currently, and a large wetland, they believe they have sufficient space. I could be wrong, but I had heard that they were looking at the potential to acquire neighbouring property as well. There's a quarry next door. But that was one of the reasons why the idea of a sub-regional facility on the Cambridge site was discounted, because of, I guess, those site constraints, and they do have some geotechnical challenges there.
Yeah, okay. They might, the problem is, of course, it might be all of our problem if they can't get that extra capacity in future, or entity B's problem, and then the whole region, larger region, where's it? Just a note, the Waipa DC lack of funding for the land purchase was discussed in the joint meeting with Waipa Council just a couple of weeks ago that we had, so it's been put on the agenda, and they acknowledged it was an issue that they'd have to address I think they were thinking of in the next LTP, their next LTP. We pushed that it should be sooner, so we'll come back to that.
That's correct, Councillor Dave. It was for the next LTP, but they've acknowledged that they definitely would like to meet that gap.
Yeah. Just in terms of the growth triggers you talked about that might cause the southern plant to need to come on stream earlier, does that take account of the thinking that not only SL1 and WA, which are currently being talked about as growth areas on the south end of the city, but also SL2, the area between the airport and Peacock, might need to come on stream earlier, the area and that we have an interest in for other reasons as well, that particular block of land, which is probably it's a larger area in geography than SL1 even. I mean, are we really talking about the fact that it might be significantly faster than 2040? Is that being covered off?
Not in the detailed business case. So the detailed business case has made assumptions around the extent and the timing of growth and the need to divert flow from Hamilton. In terms of sizing the footprint, you know, the size of the land that we want to secure for a plant, we have based that on the future needs, which does include the potential for the areas that you're talking about. But the costs that we've included for the plant and conveyance itself in the detailed business case don't include for servicing those areas.
What about just as to add, not so much adding an area, but adding a type of industry, if wet industry wanted to go into Titanium Park, the whole industrial area around the airport, is that something that would be covered off in the detailed business case?
Yeah, we've made assumptions around a proportion of wet industrial activity occurring at the airport, but we have assumed that that will be delayed until we have a plant large enough to sort of manage the risks that might present. You don't want a higher proportion of industrial sort of waste coming to your plant than sort of domestic waste, so there's some risks that need to be managed. But the stage 3 sort of cost estimates that are included in the detailed business case do include for some wet industrial activity at the airport.
So in the workshop coming up, will we be able to have a look at that staging and test the growth assumptions, for instance, that have been woefully inadequate to date, the growth assumptions in other areas of council's work?
I don't know about testing them because we have landed the growth assumptions for the purpose of the detailed business case. When we move into implementation, in my mind, that's when they really need to be revisited, because we'll be basing, you know, consenting strategies, concept designs, really nailing down staging based on those assumptions. So we've presented and had agreed the growth assumptions to be used for the business case.
By whom?
The project governance group.
Okay,
yep.
But not yet the elected wings anywhere, because the growth assumptions that we used in the LTP have been challenged even in the recent future-proof hearings by not just by people like myself who sound like a broken record, but also by professionals coming in giving submissions.
So those were some of the early key decision points that were made for the purpose of the business case. We needed to land growth assumptions to use for the purpose of this exercise. When we move into implementation, so actual design and looking to consent, then we'll revisit those growth assumptions, and it could potentially change the staging.
So that's interesting. There's a clear difference of opinion between at least some in the elected wing then and some in the your wing, because those growth assumptions, it would seem to me, would need, if you're going to do any testing, need to be tested at the time that budgets are worked out, are they not? Because by the time you apply for a consent, you've got budgets already approved. If your budget is thought by some to be not enough, you need to do that testing a bit earlier, don't you?
What we've included in the LTP is the cost of land for the ultimate.
No, I'm talking about future budgeting. You've said that the testing will take place at the time of applying for consents, and I've asked you whether, in fact, that's too late. it needs to be done at the time of setting up the budgets for, because you set your budget before you apply for a consent, surely.
So, sorry, Chair Dave, what I meant was that as we move into the implementation phase, so the next phase after the detailed business case, my view is that we need to revisit some of those fundamental assumptions, including the population assumptions that have been used for the detailed business case. So the detailed business case is based on a view at a point in time. As we move into implementation, some of those fundamental assumptions need to be revisited and reconfirmed.
Okay, because I think Mayor Paula alluded to the point in her question about the need to make sure that we were nimble enough in terms of this project to be able to handle future growth, and that's not just greenfields growth, it's any growth, infill and greenfields.
The implication in terms of the recommended option is changing the timing of future stages. So we've got 3 stages detailed in the business case that will be presented to you. The first is really around meeting the sort of short to medium term needs of the airport precinct. The second is meeting the, I guess, medium needs of the airport precinct, which is expected to grow. And then the third stage assumes that, it's at that point in time Hamilton would be diverted to the plant. So we've set it out based on those stages.
So you're saying that areas like SL1 and WA are not included in your calculations for stage 1?
No. So stage 1 is...
So where are they going to go?
So we've looked at the footprint of the plant site based on what could be needed to service the likes of those areas. But the plant staging and the conveyance costs that are included in the business case are based on the assumptions that we've used.
No, I've just asked where, if SL1 and WA, by example, because they are on the early list, likely, certainly WA is, where is that capacity going to be achieved from? You're saying that's all going to go to Puketi and that can handle all of SL1 and WA?
No, I'm not saying that.
So where are they going to go? Or you're saying that's going to hold things up? They're not, because you're saying not until stage 3 at the earliest, from what I just heard you say.
That's based on the assumptions we've made for the detailed business case. If there was a need to divert flow south earlier, and that could be triggered by a number of things, by increased infill within the city, by, reaching the footprint capacity of Puketi earlier than we've assumed because population projections change, or it could also be triggered by the upgrade costs of conveyance to get flows from the southern parts of Hamilton to Puketi, then the timing of stage 3 could come earlier. I guess that's one of the benefits of the preferred option is those stages aren't fixed by a date, they're really fixed by demand.
Yeah, but that's a bit of a standard stock answer there, to be honest, Jackie. I'm asking about effectively why the new proposed growth areas at the south end of the city are not being looked at in relation to the early stages of the southern wastewater treatment plant. You're talking about a detailed business case has not looked at that or considered that should happen based on a decision by technical staff involved in it when we haven't had a reference group meeting for over a year in this of the elected member reference group that's been set up to look at those and thrash out some of those questions.
So the population assumptions that we've used, they were agreed by the governance group. So it's been through the governance group, the timing, the extents, the way that we would consider SL1. So the fact that we've considered it in terms of the site size you might need to service not just that area, but any other area that came up. That was agreed at the governance group meetings, as you say, some time ago. Alongside the minimum treatment standards that we should be applying for the plant. So all of those key assumptions for the purpose of the detailed business case have been through the governance group.
You're not answering the question. I'm talking specifically about growth areas in the south that are not currently don't currently have residences in them, but are clearly at the top of the list. Now, I'm not saying when that list will eventuate, but for instance, WA, with about 1,000 units, is already being worked on, has been for a year or so now between our staff and the developers in that area. You know, where is that going to go? Because it's nothing to, don't worry about whether the growth estimates are right or not for the point of that. Where is SL1 and WA for 2 areas, where is their wastewater going to go? And you're not giving me, you're not telling me that it's going anywhere. You're telling me that the growth assumptions mean that it's not, those aren't going to happen. Well, sorry, that's not what's being talked about elsewhere in council. So look, I won't pursue that anymore because there's a clear gap in the fact that there hasn't been a reference group meeting to discuss some of these issues. There hasn't been a workshop to discuss these issues, and technical staff have gone ahead with doing excellent technical work, but not based on some of the other work that's going on elsewhere in council. So I've got a real concern about how far we've gone without some of these issues being thrashed out in the forums that were set up. I don't know whether you'd like to comment on that.
Well, look, I think what I would say is that there is obviously a reference group coming up on the 29th of April. Your comments are noted. I would also say that the areas you refer to have been, there has been conversations about them. I think the key here is about any plant, including a new southern plant, would take many, many years to come on stream. So if areas such as SL1 or WA, which are part of our conversation, and obviously we cover that later in the agenda today, would need to be assessed in terms of infrastructure and how those would be serviced in an interim capacity until a new plant to the south of the city was on stream. So these conversations are being joined up, Councillor Dave. It is not a simple answer, is probably what I would say.
Well, yeah, but it needs an answer, and I've been trying to elicit where. I'm not saying that stuff has to go to a new southern plant. Where does it go?
And I think
or
that goes
are we going to say because we don't have the capacity, we won't allow any growth in that area?
I think that goes to the very heart of the assessments and work that the team are doing, and I see Chris has come to the table around just infrastructure and infrastructure networks and capacity for a high growth area, both in terms of our brownfield and greenfield areas and the emerging areas. So you know, just to reassure you that these conversations are being joined up, and I think as Jackie has said, the business case outlines a scenario, but it contemplates other scenarios, but it also contemplates various staged approaches. So these elements are together, but potentially we can take that into a briefing and explore that further. Yeah,
the staged approach doesn't include capacity for growth areas at the southern end of the city, though, according to what Jackie said, or you know, it's not envisaged that they might be in stage 3, the last stage. So you know, Blair, I'm hearing desktop answers, not reality ones. I think Chris might want to comment.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up and say, look, we understand the issue, and we've got some meetings coming up, and we'll pick up and address the issue. But I think what I'm hearing, and Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the process at the moment is about future-proofing ourselves and buying the right bit of land and doing the consenting. In terms of the staging, my view, if council and others wanted to bring stage 3 forward and the funding was there, we can. That's the beauty of this proposal.
That's not the question
either.
But
you can still make that decision at any time.
That's not the question for us. Where is the capacity going to come from that will service growth areas in the south that we're currently looking at in other parts of council?
Yep,
what's going to WA and SL1?
Yeah, look, it's a really challenging issue which we've been trying to convey to you. Like, there's only 2 options. It heads to Puketi down the western interceptors, which are well undersized, and we've got to spend a huge amount of money upgrading those interceptors on the western side, or we find a way to redivert it to the southern plant at a cost. So those are the two clear options.
Well, are
so
they,
we can-
yeah, but is that going to form part of the discussion in the detailed business case? Because if one option there is using the southern southern wastewater treatment plant, then surely that's going to be covered in the detailed business case. But I'm hearing it's not.
Yep. So
The detailed business case, I guess, does include the potential to service additional areas beyond the assumed growth that we have considered for the detailed business case. At one of our governance group meetings, you asked the question around, what are the servicing needs to pick up the areas like SL1. And so we have done some work looking at a concept level, how you might convey those areas to a southern facility. So we have done that as part of the detailed business case. But the sizing that we've used, that we've based stage 3 on, doesn't include for those areas currently.
So, yeah, it's not a detailed business case. It includes growth for those areas. So should we be telling SL1 proponents right now, go away, because it's going to be decades before we could actually service that area? Because that's not what the answers we've had for them so far. I mean, Chris, what do we tell those developers that have presented to us, that we've talked to about all sorts of things? Option A, the Western Interceptor enlargement, it's not even on the books yet. It's a thing that hasn't been investigated. And option 2 has only had a conceptual discussion. It's not included in stage 1, 2 or 3 of the southern plant. So go away.
Look, I think we're best to pick this up and address it there, but as we move forward. But one of the answers is our outer boundary principles, where the outer boundary have got to pay for the costs of their growth. So the ability will be there if they want to pay the conveyance costs to get to this plant. We'll have a plant that's consented with a footprint that will...
In decades. Jackie herself said 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, but the proposal that we're looking at now, as I understand it, is to, in the early years, buy the land that's got the great flexibility and get the consents that will allow it to happen. So it's the cost of conveyance which becomes the issue.
Yeah, but that's not being part of the detailed business case. It's a conceptual look at the issue. Jackie's words, not mine.
Yeah, and I think we acknowledge that, and we can pick that up and just address that in the next meeting.
I have a real problem about the disconnect here, Chris. It doesn't, we are telling the development community one thing when we're talking to them about their future plans and what they have to do, and we're not even saying to future-proof where those groups are asking to be included as future growth areas around Hamilton. We're not even telling them that not for 20 to 30 years at least would we be able to service such an area.
I think to be clear, Councillor Dave, we haven't said to those areas that there is capacity. I think that, and obviously we'll pick that up later in the agenda. I think the questions are good questions, and I think this goes to the very heart of Three Waters infrastructure is a significant enabler, but also a critical part of our future planning. And so the extent to which our long-term planning, looking at Three Waters network aligns with our land use planning is a critical interface. And then the second part of that is when we can fund it and how we fund that. And I think, as Chris and Jackie have said, the first step, the southern plant, is acquiring the land. The next stage is then the rate at which we can construct and build a plant to service that southern part of the city. And so your questions are great, and it just highlights the very challenge we have in terms of a fast growth city with demands right across the network on all parts of the city through our strategic networks, and exacerbated by intensification brownfield, which is also adding demand to the water, wastewater, stormwater network.
So that's right, and I will have the same concerns about other areas when we start talking about the northern plant. How could we service R2 and the volume of activity that would go in there. How could we service a CBD that has another 3,500 residential units in it if we haven't got any extra capacity that's being funded in the near future? I mean, buying land is absolutely a good thing to do for the future. If we're talking about 30 years out, what about 5 to 10 years out? So, I mean, we are getting into the wider area, and the southern wastewater treatment plant is one large element within that.
And I think that goes to the very, very heart of the issue that this whole business case is about, is the need for long-term strategic options for the city, but then secondly, the substantial upfront cost that's required to facilitate these areas. And I think, as Chris has said, we're contemplating other development potential areas for the city. It's not as simple as just to say there may be capacity in the immediate vicinity. It's how do we actually get, in this case, wastewater from those areas through to the treatment facilities. And that is the wider challenge with this, which is business case and the wider work of Chris's team is contemplating.
But have we not been asking for best part of 2 years, Blair and Chris, for these issues to give us some answers, tell us the costs? I mean, it's all very well saying to developer, you meet all the costs. What are the costs? What is going to be needed? Unless you do that's included in the detailed business case, you're not going to be able to tell SL1 developers what they would need to fund.
They're very complex questions, Councillor, with very complex answers. Like part of our thinking needs to be informed by the northern wastewater detailed business case as well, and how we can manage the growth in the northern areas. Our conveyance systems are at capacity, and they're really challenged by the notion of intensification and adding new growth cells. So there's really high-level strategic questions that need to be answered, and the two business cases are a really important step in that, and it's taking time to work through that.
Chris, the two business cases don't include how we're going to meet capacity in the short to medium term in the growth areas that we know are coming, that this committee and this council has sitting in front of it, and the Future-Proof have sitting in front of it.
Yeah, but we can't give you those short-term answers until we know these long-term strategic answers. You know, in terms of the capability of our plant, like it's really clear to me through the process we absolutely need the southern plant to service our eastern side growth, and it's critical that we do get on and buy the land and start the process.
Yeah, but Chris, the stage 1 and stage 2 are for the airport precinct, according to Jackie. Yeah. Stage 3, 2040-ish, which has been a time mentioned, but it might be where you can look at some growth. Even then, it's mostly around the airport. How is that going to help the tramway block with 1,200 housing units on the east side? It's in time for that to be useful for those developers, TGH.
Yep. So look, it's a really good conversation, this, and it's striking at the heart of the timing of stage 1, 2 and 3. So I think that's the issue we're picking up, and we'll go away and put some more thought into that. So the functionality of the business case is there. It's the timing issue now of the 1, 2 and 3.
And I think just to add to that, Chris, the nature of these assets that are required are beyond the ability of a particular developer to invest in. These are city investments that council necessarily, given the sheer scale required, both in terms of the plant and the infrastructure to connect it to our main networks. It is not a matter of a particular developer saying we'll build it. The scale of these is well beyond that. So this.
Yeah, I think we all understand it's really challenging how these things are funded.
Okay, final question from me, and I'll say.
Setting a new record, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Well, the reason that I am is because there has not been the projects governance group meetings or workshops on this that there ought to have been, and that were actually promised the last time we had this discussion, I might add. My last question related to point 2B2 in the staff recommendation, where it says the draft MOU will be presented to the project governance group for endorsement. Surely that should be for consideration. I mean, there's a huge presumption in there that it's just going to be endorsed sort of in a rubber stamp style. Where is is that genuinely going to be a discussion that can test things and maybe adjust and change or send away for more work?
Look, we take the lead from the group. The current draft is in circulation at a staff level, including the control group members. So just awaiting their feedback and feedback from mana whenua. It's also with Tompkins Wake, just to do a legal review. And the expectation is...
Sorry, they've already gone to Thompson Wake and mana whenua.
Aye, yep.
So why haven't they gone to elected members?
Well, we're seeking feedback from all of the partners, so they are with the control group members prior to going to the governance group members.
Okay.
The content has been through the governance group meeting, so we're really just giving effect to the direction that we were given by the governance group.
It's over a year since the governance group met, Jackie.
The last meeting we had was at the end of June.
Last year, yeah.
Yep.
Well, okay. 9 months. Okay, thanks. I've got another question from Rob.
Yeah, look, I haven't forgotten my question. But mine also focuses, and thanks, Dave, for your conversation on this. Mine focuses also around that growth in the south, and we seem to be missing one partner from the table, and that's Waikato District Council. You mentioned briefly about their interest being around Matangi, but also around Tamahiri. I would have thought that they would have been an eager partner at the table, given the Tamahiri Country Club, which seems to be growing. They've bought more land. There's talk of a hospital going there too, as well as Eventide, which has been growing over the years. But I would have thought they would have been a really keen partner to be funding with us at the table for the land and ultimately the infrastructure costs. But seemingly they're not there.
I think they are a really keen partner. So they've participated, like everyone else, in the project all the way through. And while they haven't funded anything in the LTP, and I guess that's key, at least we have. I guess they've gone one step further than others in actually noting a 20% contribution, which is far greater than their proportion based on the assumptions that we've made for the business case. So again, just want to emphasise that we've made assumptions in terms of the growth projections and the areas that will be served, and I do believe that as we move from the business case to implementation, it's really critical that we review those assumptions, because then we can pick up things like, should we be looking at diverting parts of Hamilton earlier or extending the catchment within the Waikato district wider? We can look at all of those things going into that implementation phase.
But are they not displaying the same vision that we are in terms, when you talk about assumptions, which is about planning for what we might need in the future, which is some vision, are we not getting that from our neighbours in terms of what they think? Because, we're not over them in terms of everything that they do, but they must have some plans for what they ultimately want to do in Tamahiri and...
they have been completely comfortable with the assumptions that, all of the organisations have informed the growth assumptions. And they've agreed with what we've assumed for those parts of their district. They're heavily involved in the northern detailed business case with Taupiri, Hopuhopu, Ngarua Wahia. But they're comfortable with the assumptions we've made for the purpose of the business case. Okay. So do you think, we've got governance groups going with both of these councils. Do you think that we need to be prodding them a little more? Or are you comfortable that that's happening and that what you're getting in terms of help to move this whole project forward? And it is a huge project and involves millions and millions of dollars. Are you comfortable that we'll get an outcome that will be fair, not just to them, but also to the Hamilton ratepayer who's
seemingly from where perhaps Councillor Ewan and I are sitting, seem to be providing all the vision, all the funding, and then we'll open it up and they'll say, oh yes, we can tap in and use some of that now.
Yeah. I think, like I said in response to your earlier comments, as we move into negotiating the funding agreement, the actual funding agreement, so moving beyond delivering a detailed business case, that's where those discussions really need to happen at a governance level.
Yep, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I think Councillor Rob is probably speaking for us all when he says we not just those discussions, we probably wouldn't accept something that didn't have a fair funding share. I think that could be agreed around all the council. So, Councillor Martin, thanks.
Yeah, just be patient with me because I'm trying to distill this into, for communication with our residents and what's at stake. And it is predicated on the basis that we are in a huge housing crisis and obviously we are looking at appropriate supply and growth. First question is, you mentioned that the governance group hasn't met since June, and I'm just wanting to zero in because obviously you have the practice of this incredibly complex exercise into billions of dollars eventually. There seems to be a disconnect that I've got an alternate member of the governance group, albeit he happens to be chair of this committee, asking you the questions he's just asked you.
So I guess from a project delivery perspective, there have been no material changes in any of the substance that will be delivered in the detailed business case from what's already been presented to and agreed by the governance group. So all of the things that we've discussed have been through the governance group. The structure, straw man, and the levels of agreement that should be in the MOU have been through the governance group and agreed. There have been delays, and I apologise for those delays in terms of getting our peer review completed, staffing issues, and the like, and also trying to get time within a group of people who have very busy calendars into their schedule. So it has been too long since the governance group met. In terms of regular updates to this committee, we've provided those to every committee, either as standalone reports or through the GM's report, and really just reiterated or reminded you of the decisions that had already been made at a high level and referenced back to previous reports where that detail was provided.
The 2B3 says it's coming to strategy growth to the governance group for endorsement, then it comes to us for approval or otherwise. What might or otherwise mean? Because unlike the DHB, and I'm saying this really respectfully, 3 members of this council have been on a DHB board. We totally understand what rubber stamp looks like. We've been on a DHB. So I'm not being discourteous, but I really want to talk about governance, and ultimately the authority is going to sit here as one of the partners. So I'm just, if you like, trying to tease through, because I suspect there may be more discussion.
Yeah. If more discussion is required, then that's what we'll do.
So what I need, because we've got hopes, dreams, aspirations around SL1, WA, the exciting Tainui Group Holdings, I think, residential aspirations on the east side of the river, as I understand it. In terms of the tailing of the report, will that report give us some clear, succinct timelines of what happens and what does not happen, if you want to mean? So I want to know. You've got, say, a group that wants to develop WA, or we think that's part of our strategy in terms of supply, or SL1. Where does that sit on the calendar? If I can just say that, are we, this council, saying to the hopes and dreams for the WA area, come back in 20 years, it's not going to happen? Are we saying to TGH, come back? I'm saying, to a degree, I'm putting these into lay people's terms, but I think it's really important that we front, not just with the developers, but with our residents, as what's ahead of us.
Yeah. So Martin, Councillor Martin, I think that picks up on the direction that Dave was giving us to put further consideration into that. So, yeah, we've got that picked up.
I might just add, if I may, that the detailed business case is looking at the strategic wastewater sort of treatment servicing needs for the sub-region. In terms of what is required within the city itself, particularly from a conveyance perspective, that's what our master plans look at. So the detailed business case won't provide all of the answers to your questions. There are other pieces of work that really pick up on how do you service the level of intensification that's now being contemplated? How do you pick up and serve these greenfields areas that are planned or unplanned? That is really captured through a different piece of work that's led internally within Hamilton City, because I think it's important to remember that this project is a sub-regional metro area project, not just a Hamilton City one. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear that the detailed business case won't be answering all of those questions. That's really another exercise that we do as a city and as a team on a 3-yearly basis. We do have to look at doing that sooner because we need to understand what the implications of the levels of intensification that are being proposed are.
So the point I'm making, I'm absolutely respecting the complexity of this work. I'm respecting the intellectual capital that sits around your table. I totally get that. What I think in terms of communication, it's really important to all the TAs, all the participants, that the roadmap that I can explain to residents, if you like, is clear. And bluntly, I can explain to people who want to buy a house at an affordable price, in terms of supply and all of those things. I'm not trying to simplify stuff, but I think it's really important if that report very clearly refers us to the other work that needs to be done as well. I'm sure it will, but I think in terms of readability, dare I say it, so you've got a very complex document, of course, which it should be, but certainly I would hope in the executive summary, etc., that it will be highlighting other pieces of work. Yeah. Not wanting to give you any advice on comms, but...
Yeah, so Councillor, you might be talking to our Hamilton urban growth strategy and how we develop the city. So it's more than just infrastructure. Infrastructure is important, but the hugs debate is probably the one you're speaking to there.
Yeah. And Councillor Martin, if I could just add to that, you referred a couple of areas, SO1, WA. We shouldn't forget that this business case is also thinking about all the critical areas within the city, central city, brownfield areas, the existing greenfield areas that we're still working through to service and to provide solutions for. So there are many, many layers to this. And of course, that's where HUGS is also thinking deeply about each of those different growth areas. And of course, we also have the principles which are critically important for us as we contemplate any areas outside the city that may become part of our future longer term growth. And those principles go to the very heart of things such as infrastructure and strategic infrastructure and how we may be able to service those without compromising those existing parts of the city which are already enabled through our planning. So it's a very complex consideration.
Thompson, then I'm going to put up a motion which is slightly different from the staff recommendation. Sarah?
Chair, and I'll second that if you don't already have someone. Jackie, I was just interested in your explanation around the master planning that we do internally. And you said we'd need to do that sooner with the district plan changes. What is that time frame looking like? Because that sounds like a really critical piece of work when we're reviewing the district plan and also the Hamilton urban growth strategy as well. So how do those things align?
Yeah. One of the things, sorry to harp on about population projections and growth projections, but those are fundamental inputs to master planning exercises as well. I guess as an infrastructure team, we rely on those inputs from others to really inform the infrastructure response. So once we get that information, what typically happens, because this is where we develop our programs to put to you for LTP funding consideration. We go through typically an 18-month exercise for each of the waters to develop a master plan and recommend interventions or solutions to respond to growth demands, levels of service needs, etc. Because of the massive step change in development that's been contemplated through Plan Change 12 and others, the growth projections we've been using in the past are well off the mark in terms of what we are now being expected to respond to. So we're really reliant on updated growth projections to help us develop a master planning response. We're very conscious, though, of the timing of Plan Change 12 and the need for us to do an abridged version of master planning just to get our head around what the response might be to inform those hearings. So our aim is really to have an abridged version of master planning, not what we would normally do, completed in the next 12 months so that we can inform a Plan Change 12 hearing.
Right, okay. All right, and will that work? I assume would there be like a briefing or opportunity to understand what's being proposed in terms of that master planning closer to the time?
I would be happy to brief elected members on the process that we go through. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And I think the, again, important assumptions around growth will inform that, and they should come through you as well.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, councillors. The resolution proposed that I'll move is up there on the board, and it is essentially what you've received from staff under A and B with the words, the assumptions, final and for approval and for endorsement and for approval being removed, not to keep the timeline, but to have a wider possibility of outcomes, if you like, depending on what those different groups, which includes this committee, think of what's presented to them. So just, if you can see, I left the original wording, just crossed it out so you can see the change there. Can you read it, Rob? No, I can't. Sorry. So in part 1, it would read the Southern Metro Wastewater, not the final one, and it wouldn't say for approval, just say be presented on that date, and the same sort of thing, removing the words for endorsement and for approval in the next two, if that makes sense. So that's the explanation, and Sarah said Sarah is seconding that. Councillors will go into debate, which we've done a lot of. I'll try and keep it really brief, my bit here in moving the motion. Obviously, there's some fundamental concerns about whether we're taking account of not just the volume of growth, but where it might happen coming up, and the concern about whether the infrastructure will be in any meaningful time frame be able to meet the short and medium term needs that we've already seen in other parts of council coming up in the lift. So we're not saying don't keep doing the great technical work that staff are doing, and we've probably got the best in the country to do that, but the strategic implications are throwing up some, in my mind, some big concerns. I wouldn't want it to be assumed that the answer we'll get the final answer on the 29th of April or the subsequent committee meeting here on the 19th of May, because I have serious doubts about whether the direction of travel covers all that we need to have covered. So that's why I've made those changes in that. I also note, and councillors might remember, that our staff I can't remember the name of the unit, but are working on a new form of modelling that doesn't just look at population projections, but also where that's happening and the dwelling numbers, which we've received some very recent information. We've got consent applications at a higher level than we've ever had before at the moment, in the middle of a sort of a pandemic semi-lockdown. So there's lots of concerns about whether we're going to be able to meet the growth. And even if we can't meet it, quantifying what the costs will be for that and where and when it'll need to happen. All of those things are really important, and I'm not sure that we're actually in a position to give answers. We're telling developers when they come through their door, look at hugs. If you can satisfy all of them, you might be able to go ahead. But I think we're a long way further off with the work that's happened so far. So I'm leaving in this motion, trying to leave the door open wider than staff have proposed initially, so that we can make sure that we cover more bases than perhaps we would have before. Sarah, did you want to speak as seconder?
Yes, thank you.
Please go on the list, please, if you need to speak. Not you.
All right, firstly, I'd like to thank Jackie and other staff for your work on this. This is critically important for the future of Hamilton, and we often talk about growth, which I think can often feel a bit like a bit of a distanced word in some ways for our residents. But when you actually think about it, we're talking about providing the opportunity for future residents to be well housed within Hamilton, and we're also talking about ensuring that we've got enough capacity within the city to help to stabilise house prices. And we know that the price of housing has reached crisis point, and we haven't seen the end of that yet. So this is really important work, and I'm incredibly frustrated with the failure to date as a country for us to actually deal with the funding of infrastructure. Local government, as it's set up right now, is set up to fail to deliver infrastructure for housing. It's set up to fail to deliver affordable housing. We can't rely on existing ratepayers and a low ratio of debt to revenue to actually fund huge intergenerational projects like this. There's a tidal wave of costs coming, and I sit here and I just feel very frustrated that I can't see the light. Well, I can't see the way forward for us unless we have some significant change. And so I do think that we just have to keep on advocating really strongly in terms of ensuring that central government understands these issues. And I haven't seen that they've fully understood the issue yet. We do have Three Waters reform proposal, but a lot of the conversation around that has been on our standards, compliance, ensuring that we have clean water coming out of our taps and going into our rivers and things, but we haven't really heard a lot of conversation around funding growth, particularly for our fast-growing areas like Hamilton, Tauranga, Auckland. So, we need to keep on pressing on this. Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor Paula, then Councillor Rob, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the debate. In terms of the Southern Wastewater plant, it's much needed. My concern is that we might need it sooner than we can afford to do it, and that our proportion of the project seems to have grown, and I just hope, like anything, that it does not grow further, and we're left from what once was a partnership, actually pretty much doing 90% of the work ourselves and at our cost. I do think the economic value of such assets must be better factored in, because it's not just the cost of building them and operating them, maintaining them, that matters. It's what benefit does that deliver to the community, and to which community? And we know that the Southern Wastewater plant will deliver much to both large parts of Waipa and large parts of Hamilton and the whole area around the airport precinct. So absolutely must be a partnership that is fair and reasonable. Look, councillors, we've talked about this. we're blue in the face. We know that there are eye-watering costs coming for infrastructure to councils. I have, and I will continue to press on government to remind them that we can't go alone. We can't go alone. There is no way that we can deliver growth that we want, the future that we want, at the pace that we want, which delivers benefits to the government because they want affordable housing, because they want new forms of transportation, because they want a viable regional airport, all of those things. We can't do it unless we have some help, because it's hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not talking chump change here. Infrastructure is the biggest burden that local government, New Zealand, all around the country faces. And this is just a micro example. The staff have been working really hard to do this cost effectively and efficiently and to secure partnerships. But this is just a micro example of what we've got coming, everyone. And it's all very well for us to think about this year, but we're making decisions. We've got to make wise decisions for Hamiltonians 20 years hence too. We can't leave them a legacy of cost. And I tell you, there's not a conversation that I have with government that does not involve reminding them about the huge cost of being a fast-growing city. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. Rob, please.
Thanks, Chair. And look, I'm not going to disagree with the last three speakers. In fact, my notes pretty much follow a number of the statements that have already been made. But I want to start by congratulating and thanking the great work that's been undertaken by our staff. I feel quite impressed by not only the skills that people like Jackie and the team that she leads has, but also the vision and the foresight that they've put into what our needs would be, what the assumptions are, the difficulty of planning growth and so forth. And we're doing all of this in a time when the government is threatening to mandate us over three waters on the basis that it believes that we're not doing a good job. It does, however, in my mind, though, highlight the lack of action by some of our neighbouring councils, increasing the argument perhaps that the Minister has for these large government-controlled water entities. Both our neighbouring councils are active in the south and seemingly do not share the same vision, the need for funding, the need to get these projects underway, even though much of it will be based for them on anticipated growth, and get it underway in a way that we can do it in an efficient and cost-effective way. Look, it's not rocket science to me whether I have some financial experience or not to know that one large plant must end up being economically more beneficial for the ratepayers in all of those three entities than us going off and each building our own. The high cost of funding that Sarah and Mayor Paula have alluded to is and will be an ongoing problem for councils under our present funding model. Sarah highlights the borrowing obstacles that we have in our debt to revenue ratio, whereas business borrowing can borrow on the basis of debt to assets and equity. And look, that's exactly what the government are presenting in their mandated model as being a more efficient way of funding. Why can't we do that rather than let government come in and tell us that they've suddenly found a new funding model, which we know has been there all the time, but they're able to connect it better than we can at this stage. So thanks to staff, keep the work up, but I think I'd like to see more action coming in from our neighbouring councils. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I've got Jeff, then Ewan. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Look, I've enjoyed this particular session. Some great questions from Dave, and we are aware of the the developers on the city's periphery that are desperate to get housing underway. The south and the west is really problematic, and we need to work towards how we can practically help them unlock those developments as soon as we can. I have some sympathy for the staff answering the questions today, because a lot has changed in the last 6 months. You think about Plan Change 12, and our projections will have been impacted by already the amount of infill housing we do, but what is planned for the future under these new planning laws. So it must be incredibly complex to translate that into our infrastructure needs, because the goalposts have moved significantly. I would, in terms of the costs, I would caution against the temptation to continually complain as a city about eye-watering costs and how we can't cope. I think we're in an era with a range of legislation heading our way, all pushing us towards centralisation and reduced local voice. There are ways for central government to be involved. Changing funding mechanisms, such as Rob has just suggested, is obvious. Yet they're not looking at it. There's ways for central government to be involved without taking over. And that's what we should be encouraging. And I'm always wary that looking helpless is not the answer here. Saying we can't afford infrastructure just plays into that government narrative that they need to step in and take over. So I would just caution against that. Thank you.
Thanks. Ewan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Dave. First of all, I join the chorus of thanks to Jackie and her team for the work that they've done and they continue to do, and it's absolutely vital. I guess the only comment I would make is the absolute importance of ensuring the elected members are taken along in this journey. And the minute that they are somewhat disconnected and feeling that they haven't had the latest optics, the more inclined you are to be confronted by Perry Mason at its best, and the inquisitorial investigation and setting new records, may I say, in terms of duration of questions. So I can only aspire to achieving that duration. Maybe I wouldn't have been able to get away with it under any other chair other than the chair that's currently there. I guess the other thing I would say is I somewhat agree with Deputy Mayor Taylor in regards to, I think this illustrates, and Three Waters to me illustrates the fact that I think the current government's desire for centralisation, they often bring the nuclear option very early on, and there's no doubt that we've seen in this environment smaller councils being very challenging, where the larger councils, and in our case I think Hamilton has been incredibly proactive in trying to manage some of these undoubtable challenges that we're facing. And that we found it very hard to get them to agree with strategies. And of course, then the government reacts by saying, all right, well, we'll just centralise and create these mega entities. And I don't know if that's particularly fit for purpose. The one thing I definitely agree with Councillor McPherson is getting the data right to ensure that we base our plans and projections on real growth. The other thing I think I agree with Councillor McPherson is this city will continue to grow, and the demand for growth is going to grow, and that critical infrastructure is at the very core of what we're supposed to be doing, despite the threats that may no longer be at the core of what we're going to do. So at the end of the day, this is essential. Getting future-proof infrastructure is a no-brainer. The Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant has always been known as a gateway to enable growth. I have no difficulty with it. I just want to make sure that the data of our growth projections are right, and that that ultimately, as we implement this, that the burden of costs is fairly distributed to those who should be paying for it. And I don't know if we've got that right just yet.
Thanks. Councillor Martin.
Just
to acknowledge, obviously, as others have, to Jackie and the team, the intellectual capacity and acumen and hard work they are bringing to this exercise. It is very crucial on this exercise that governance, and I deliberately made references to a DHB rubber stamp model, also brings absolute intellectual rigour, because this is some really critical decisions that are being made moving forward. And Councillor Wilson and I don't always agree. We're good personal friends, but politically we're sort of somewhat different sometimes. But there is a place for the Perry Masons in this council. And on this exercise, I just want to, politely say to our staff team that Perry Masons, not just one Perry Mason, but a number of Perry Masons, dare I say it, will be in action in May. I also just want to, I think, the contributions from all members on this have been really good, but I think the insights shared by Councillor Pascoe, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Wilson, in my view, are really good. I will say, and I, as you know, am incredibly frustrated with the shape, form and structure of local government, particularly in the Waikato. And as I said, I don't want to go over old ground, but just, the waters exercise, which was absolute monumental failure of local government being left to do it in terms of the three TAs, failed on that exercise. I'm not saying that a central government mega entity is the answer, not at all. But if there's one exercise where the TAs in this area should be joined at the hip, should be all paying their fair share, it is this exercise. And I just remind ourselves, it's only in local government land that people talk boundaries. The 95% of people who live in this region, they will make a house buying choice about where they can afford, how's that convenient, where their kids go to school, where they have a job, and all of those issues, or house renting choices, they will make a series of choices. It will have nothing to do with some artificial boundary. And I will make the point on this exercise, I totally agree with Councillor Pascoe and others, this is where Waikato, Waipa and Hamilton must be joined at the hip, or future generations will pay a price for short-sightedness versus vision.
Thank you. Maxine, please.
Here, Councillor Gallagher. I endorse those sentiments entirely. And those also thanks to the great work that's gone in behind putting all of this together. Not forgetting, of course, that the stimulus funding that provided us the opportunity to get this data has come through that $16 million grant from government. It's given us an evidence base that really is an approach that is well-founded and good judgment and decisions can be made from. There's no doubt that the benefits for our local economy, especially in that southern area, is really enabled and can be realised through fruition of these plans. And the full program, if realised, then has the opportunity to enable the growth that we're experiencing and that will only increase. I think that evidence helps us to build a really good case to work in a different future model. And what that might be at this stage is still for debate. But underpinned by that good evidence and work, those decisions can be eased. What disappoints me most, I guess, is that there isn't more collaboration from our surrounding district and being able to come to solutions that are more equal. And I look forward to future discussions that might be able to thrash that out in a fairer way. And though in the interim, believe that the work that we've done to date helps us to take this proposal to future outcomes that are captured in the motion being put. So I'll be supporting it. Thank you, Chair Dave.
Thanks. And just really briefly, right of reply, I think there's no doubt that whether we go into a mega entity, I think as Martin talked about it with Three Waters, or nothing happened at all, we were certainly going to increase the area that was covered by, in this area, in Hamilton sort of area, that was covered by Three Waters. We're either going to go through the regional approach that this is part of, where we're already talking about not just the two surrounding councils, but there were some other councils talking about coming on board as well voluntarily, or we're going to go to the mandated bigger entity still. Either way, we're going to go in that area. And to me, what's really important that we do is not say the technical answer is this, and therefore that's what we're going to look at the funding needs for. We've got to say, what is the strategic answer? You know, what are we going to need to do, looking realistically at growth and needs in the area to do, measure the cost, and there may well be, in fact, I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a very large shortfall, which is sort of what Sarah alluded to, but we need to have those costs worked out. What would it take to enable the sort of growth that's being proposed in the southern area of the city, in the industrial areas of the city, in infill in the city? You know, what will it cost? Don't try and hold back. Don't try and be King Canutes to hold back that growth because we're worried about the dollars. Let's measure what it would take to do that and then stare at it. And if it gets passed over to a new entity, whether it's a central Waikato entity, as we were talking about before, or entity B that covers 95% of the country or whatever it is, we need to pass on that information, that accurate data that's based on real needs for Hamilton and the surrounding areas. If we don't do that, we sell not just ourselves short now, but we sell the next generation short, I think. So we really have to do the full costing exercise, the full detailed business case in these things, so we get the full picture and we can hand that over to whoever takes over this aspect from here. Thanks. So we'll move to the vote. I'll take a show of hands. Please physically raise your hands, be easier, I think, for us now.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thanks. Councillors, can I suggest we literally go out for no more than 5 minutes, grab a tea or coffee and bring it back into either the chamber or to your desk at home, if that's all right, and we'll continue the meeting at 25 to 12.
Just procedurally, Dave, is Milo okay?
No, not unless
Okay.
you're a member of the LDS Church.
What about beer? Okay,
That's acceptable in your case. We already know about that problem.
Hey, can you hear my camera? Can you hear my voice anyway? Just so I know what it sounds like.
Not
6, so we're resuming the meeting now. And we have 7, that's just a quorum. So we're on to item 8, which is the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program business case. And we've got Phil, and we've also got Robert Rodnax. G'day, Robert, again. I think we've got Phil. There's Phil, yeah. Phil, are you going to introduce this for us, or is Robert? Or?
Yes, yeah, it'll be me. Can you see me okay? Because I'm having some technical problems at my end. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start off by introducing Robert. Good morning, everyone. Robert Rodnax is going to be running the slideshow. I'll do the talking. Robert's been brought in by the Future Proof Partners with a specific sort of transport director role, primarily focused on dealing with engagement between central and local government and helping work on the development of the programme that we're going to be talking about today and some of the financial conversations that we're going to go and have over the next few months to prepare ourselves for an FPIC in June. So Robert will be known to a lot of you. He works for Beckers. He's very important in terms of being able to support Peter Winder in Peter's role. As you can imagine how busy Peter is dealing with transport and water and all other aspects. So Robert's role, not so much technical, but very much in that engagement, stakeholder management position, and you'll see a lot of Robert as well as myself over the next few months. I imagine we're a bit time constrained today, so if it's okay, I can go through my presentation probably fairly quickly and get onto some questions then. Would that be okay?
Sure, thanks.
Sure. So this is a conversation and a presentation that's going on with all the Future Proof Partners right now. I know WBC and Wiper have already had theirs, and it's really part of the process that we've been having with you probably for the best part of a year now, which is really trying to engage with you on the programme business case. So we're 2 layers of level detail down from what Jackie's just been talking to you about and a few years behind. So we're just having those conversations with you and every other partner about where the programme, that emerging programme, that series of recommendations is heading. Now, from an actual project programme level, this work finishes today. So it's been quite hard getting the reporting cycles aligned and making sure that you're having relevant information because literally we were working on this stuff last night. So it's all go. So luckily, I guess in a way, the session that we had planned with you for last week got cancelled and we've got one lined up for the 6th of April. It's actually quite useful. So that one, we can go into much more detail around things like potential alignments, assumptions, those sorts of things. But I can give you a very, very brief outline on some of the key points today. So, Robert, if we could go to the first slide, please.
I think I'm sharing at the moment, am I?
Not yet, no. Robert.
Oh, golly gosh. Here I was telling Phil that I could make it work when he couldn't make it work.
No, we've got it. We've got one now, Robert.
Brilliant.
All right.
So they're on the first slide, Phil?
Yeah, on the first slide. So there's 12 points I'm going to go through very briefly. To be honest, there isn't much of a deviation from what we shared with you in our last briefing, our last update to you. Really, the devil's in the detail. So really, a lot of the work has been around developing the evidence base. Remember, this is a future-proof project, so it's making sure that alignment and collaboration is there. And also just, it takes time, as you know, to bring all the partners along on that journey. So that's always adds a little bit of time on top of the technical work. So really...
Can you just call out slide 1, slide 2? Because Tyler's sharing the screen, so you're still on the first slide. Can you please...
that's okay. I'm still on the first slide, yeah.
Thanks.
So just a quick reminder, we know what a program business case is, we know what it doesn't and what it does do, we know that it's not a level of detail, it doesn't spit out projects, it almost spits out demands and priorities, the projects come at a next stage. But it's worth just casting your mind back very quickly to the work that was done before this program business case. So that was the work done in 2019, 2020. That really did put down the challenge, or you gave us the challenge actually, to see what sort of change from a transport perspective was needed to facilitate that compact future, that how we can support the future food strategy that was in development yet. What sort of outcomes would we need? Would business as usual work? And it clearly doesn't. And it was said back then as well. And we've kind of reinforced that work in this program business case. There's been a lot of talk this morning about how much has changed over the last few months. And believe me, from a transport perspective and the way that we evaluate projects and the way that we do program business cases has been an ever-moving feast that we've had to navigate over the last 12 months. And in some cases, it gives clear direction, but does really challenge some previous assumptions and questions and things like that. But essentially, there was some terminology that you agreed a couple of years ago about a radical transport shift being required in the Waikato, and more than anything, we can say that the work we've done so far is enforcing that. Next slide, please, Robert. So some of the 12 key points. Now, this is really now related to the emerging programme itself. So some of the technical outputs that we can go into next week in a lot more detail. But I just wanted to re-emphasise the alignment with the other work that we're doing, and not just pay service. We're having meetings. There really has been some technical sharing, a lot of meetings going on regarding, for instance, say the Access Hamilton refresh. Are our objectives for this piece of work consistent with what we're discussing with you right now in a transport strategy space in where we want to go? So our emphasis on freight, on public transport, on micromobility are the two things knitting together, and they are. The work that we're inputting into the district plan and the NPS work and HUGs, are we consistent in terms of the way that we're developing our land use scenarios around our transport network developments? Yes, they are. All of the scenarios that we're coming up with are consistent with the future-proof strategy. So that real push to integrate our land use with our future transport corridors is shared across all these projects. Now, we talked a little bit last year about one of the questions we had to ask ourselves as part of the programme business case was, is the Waikato, or is Hamilton as well, big enough to sustain a rapid transit network? So your mass transit, your northern busways, your Auckland Metro Rail. This is the level of stuff we're talking about. Can we ever get those land use conditions, so those densities, to support such a transport intervention? And the answer was, given a lot of assumptions around how we manage our transport in the future, the answer was a clear yes. So that basically gives us the signal to go ahead, carry on with the work, and just start developing that evidence base around that future network solution. And as we've talked before, a lot of that is around how we time, sequence and stage things. And I can't express how important that is. Also, part of what we had to do was develop that future mode. That future mode is predominantly going to be bus-based. I can share some more work with you over time. We've done an awful lot of work into how we could potentially sustain a rail network, whether it's light rail or more that AT metro heavy rail solution going forward. There's some immense challenges around cost, around health and safety and other issues that means bus is probably more of a short and medium term option. But the emerging programme will very strongly advocate for a heavy rail solution in the future, and alignment with central government work around rail. So realise that's probably quite a hot topic. There's certainly a lot of work done behind that sort of decision, or that sort of direction so far that we're giving. Micromobility has always been very, very strong part of our proposals, part of our network. The corridors that we're going to talk about later on need to be supported by other frequent bus networks, but also connectivity by micromobility, walking and cycling, and that does include some of the 20-minute neighbourhood works that are currently being talked about right now. Next slide, please. Demand management and optimisation is always probably the unsexy part of proposals like this. So this is basically just carrying on with some of the good stuff we're doing, making our road networks more functional, making sure that we're using the space that we've got available in the best way. So it's optimising signals, it's potentially having some conversations around better use of space. So, you know, is there more opportunity for a shared freight and bus lane? Do we need that amount of capacity? It's one of the objectives of this study was always been about utilising our existing infrastructure and our assets. That's always, and that's going to form part of our emerging programme going forward. So a big part of the initial programme is going to be about carrying on doing that good work. In terms of land use, look, nothing has changed since the last time we spoke. Our aspiration always has been to go for a greater compact form, rapid transit, which is the core of this study. We need to remind ourselves, does thrive on density. If we're going to meet the demands, and this is where Ralph falls over a little bit, unfortunately. If we're going to meet the demands to facilitate a rapid transit network, so that's high frequency, great buses, lots of them, going to the right places, we need that density, and we can do that within the bounds of our current proposals, if you like. So again, we dropped the more dispersed land use from our analysis before Christmas, and we shared that with you. The way we're going right now is a variant of some more compact urban forms. From a route perspective, if you cast your mind back to the work from 2019, 2020, we had that L shape coming down from Huntly, Narrawakia, coming into the city centre, going out east towards Ruakura. So that was really a rapid transit solution there. Part of our work was to go back and say, well, now that we're looking at this in more detail, does that make sense? Can we improve upon it? What extra levels of detail can we give it? Certainly, that's very much still a favoured option. In the maps that we've shared with you in the past, that's known as RT1. What we have done is turn that out into more of a sideways T. So RT1 now goes down south. So there is the emerging programme is going to talk a little bit about our needs to go further south, because from the modelling and the work we're doing, and again, we shared this with you before Christmas, there is a strong PT and a need to facilitate some employment demands going down south.
So Phil, can we, I'm just mindful of time, we might just pause at this slide and see if the councillors need to ask any more, recognising we've got a workshop with them next week.
I was just about to say, I think the description of point 6 is best shown on the map on page 25 of the report, which shows those routes you've just talked about, Phil, and makes probably better sense than the words.
Yeah, fair enough.
And
Sorry,
if we're going to have the option for going into detail on this, like Robert says, next week. But I'm presuming the map shows what you're talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And what we can give you next week, we'll have a little bit more detail. The graphics will be next level better. So, yeah. Sorry, am I going too slowly? I can move forward.
No, well, we are take up more time than I thought we would on the intro.
Sorry, okay, I'll go quickly on the next slide. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we've got the picture, especially that last bit about developing from the old L shape into something that, especially with that new southern end, and you've said RT1 and RT2 on that map are the rapid transit routes, will be high volume, frequency, bus priority, that sort of thing. The others will be better than what we've got, but not the full bells and whistles. to start
Broadly,
with?
yes, yeah.
Okay, any questions, guys? I can't, just checking on the internet, no. I think we're sort of coloured by, it's good to get our head round this, but it's not decision time yet. When's the decision for this needed, Phil?
I think it's a conversation we need to have. It's really the level of comfort that yourself and your councillor colleagues on the FPIC group are sufficiently upskilled on the programme being adopted in June. So we've still got plenty of time, but it's more of a case of making sure that as a council, we were having the debate and councillors were able to feed through to yourself primarily any concerns or feedback. Okay, so next, what date? The workshop?
The workshop's on Wednesday. So
Wednesday next week, yeah. Okay, I think we better knock it off there, if that's all right.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so look, thanks very much. I think basically councillors bring that report with you next week. I'll move that the committee receives the report, seconded by Ewan. Any discussion? If not, those in favour, raise their hands. Against, that's carried. Thanks. We're going to have to keep moving. The draft future-proof strategy, which Keith and Blair are giving, I think, is it Keith and Hannah? Who's giving it? I'm trying to see who's there.
Keith is there.
We've got Keith. G'day, Keith. Yeah. Keith, do you want to introduce that?
Certainly.
And Hannah's there as well. Yep.
Set a slide up on the screen. Just one moment. Yes, so just tonight this is more of an information report, so I will keep this brief. So just the report just provides an overview of the scope and the submission deliberations that's underway regarding the draft future-proof strategy, our sub-regional growth strategy. So there's been a series of future-proof deliberations workshops to consider the submissions, the first of which occurred earlier this month, second of which occurs tomorrow, and then the third, which occurs in mid-May. And that, importantly, that one will be when the half a dozen or so submissions that are of most interest to Hamilton, the submissions that propose some change to the Hamilton urban enablement area, either a change to strategic timing or the introduction of a new area within that. And just to point out that those 11 submissions of most interest to us are the subject of the further discussion report in the PX section of this agenda, and alongside some other considerations. And we will be looking to take the recommendation on those 11 submissions to the 19th of May meeting. And we will have also scheduled an information or a briefing session to really get in to the detail of those following any discussion or debate in the PX section. Happy to take any questions on the content, just that overview of the process and the key dates that I provided in the report. But I think that's the sum of it.
Keith, could I perhaps add that I'm really keen that Council, before the final deliberations of future-proof, gives some writing instructions basically to me as the rep on what it is we're finally going to be pushing for in this area. So I won't go into the details of that now, but want to make sure that it's a council decision, not just Councillor McPherson sort of input into that. So,
yes.
Yeah.
I think that was the intent of our 19th of May recommendations, that we would come away with that, with a clear collective position on the 11 submissions.
Thanks. If there's no questions, I'll move that the report be received and we note the process, etc. in Part B, seconded by Councillor Mark. Get him on the board. Donovan, that is, not Mark 1. So those in favour raise their hands, please. That's carried. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. We're on to the GM's report. Hannah, are you giving that, looks like? Or is
Look, I'll speak.
Oh, you are.
Dave. So look, I'm happy to.
You got Hannah to write it, but you're giving it, getting the glory.
Oh, no, Hannah will be there to answer all the questions, but just conscious of time, we can take the report as read, just with two updates. The report refers to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund bid, and you will note that Council has, at the meeting last week, amended our bid for that project. And secondly, the report also refers to the infrastructure funding and financing investigations. Yesterday, we were advised that Minister Robertson and Minister Woods have indicated in-principle support for Crown Infrastructure Partners and Ministry of Housing and Development to work with HCC to investigate the conversion of some of the Peacock HIF loan into an IFF. So that's great news. That work is scheduled to start in September, which lines up nicely with our IAF bid and other opportunities in the city. So that's a good progression on that particular opportunity. But happy to take questions, Councillor Dave, on that and any other matters.
Yeah, there's nothing from Grant Robertson's letter that sort of is new?
No, just essentially just indicating they support in principle the investigations of a conversion of the Peacock HIF loan into an IFF, which is what we were seeking. And it enables us as staff now to do the work with the government officials to progress that further. So that's great news.
Okay, thanks. Question, Paula, thank you.
Just a comment, follow up on that. We've been chasing Minister Robertson for some time and made a bit of a breakthrough a week ago with working with Jamie Strange. So look like I'll be able to have some kind of direct conversation with him very soon. We're just trying to manage his diary and mine. So keep you in the loop about when that happens and what that looks like. Still chasing dates, but it's a promise of a meet now. So
thanks, Paula. Anything else? No. If not, I'll move that the staff recommendation we receive the report and also note those conflict of interest declarations, given that the two members of management happen to live in two of the growth areas being proposed to council. Probably a few other people as well, by the way. Okay, so I'll move, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. I'm going around the room. You're next, Sarah. Those in favour, raise their hands, please. Against, that's carried unanimously, is it? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. Now, the open information only reports, I think, was Karen going to give a really quick rundown? How was that going to work?
Yes, she was. I'm hoping Karen is there. Yes, she is.
Yes, she is, yep. She jumped onto the screen. G'day, Karen.
I'm here, and
I'm not proposing to have questions or comments on this, by the way. We don't generally in this area, but we did want to highlight a couple of things.
yes, and so I have the growth programs update report. Tyler, is there the slide show that you can show? I am only going to encourage elected members to read the growth programs updates that have been presented. There's an enormous amount of work happening across our growth areas in the city. So please, when you do get the time, have a read of those. They tell a joined up story of everything that's happening. And I was wanting to, here we are, there they are, so they cover all those areas there. So I was wanting to hand over to Stafford now, who's just going to provide a very brief, in the interests of time, update on what's been happening with HUGs and what the next steps are and when you can expect further information to come back to you. Over to you, Stafford.
Thank you, Karen. Tyler, could you please move to the next slide? So on the...
Stafford?
You're a bit quiet.
A bit quieter than normal, Stafford.
All right, I've got three councillors. Tyler, would you move to the next slide, please?
It's really hard to hear you, Stafford. Can you, I don't know, go closer to the computer mic or something?
Sorry, councillors, is that better?
A little bit.
So just wanted to quickly share with you now that the themes for growth that we
Sorry, Keith. Keith, it's not working. Can you do without your... have you got a headset? That's could be the issue. Can we just go straight into the computer? These headsets make people look very official and that, but they don't work that well sometimes.
Failing that, Karen, can you cover it?
Yes, I will try. Very briefly, so...
Sorry, is that better?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Some technical support came at the right time. Sorry, councillors. I just wanted to quickly share with you some of the emerging themes from the work underpinning HUGS. So, like Karen alluded to, it would be great if you had a chance to have a good look through the report, and if you've got any questions, please come through to me directly. But just to highlight that the themes are really around that growing from the city centre out and supporting the corridor work that you heard from Phil earlier. Also, there's work around incrementally building on what we have already achieved, the likes of Peacock with those neighbourhoods and that investment. And in the PX, you're going to hear some more around the emerging area opportunity. So HUGS is really about joining together all the pieces of strategic work that we're doing to date. Could you move to the next slide, please, Tyler? So just quickly here, we have some elected member touch points coming up on the right there. So I'm looking to bring a draft HUGS to the Strategic Growth Committee for adoption for consultation on the 28th of July meeting. And our next steps are really aligning with the district plan work, including that technical work and the infrastructure team are developing to put into that plan change work. So that's going to include the capacity analysis and the density changes. So really lining up all of the key work streams across council to make sure we're telling that joined up strategic growth story. Thanks, councillors.
And I might just, Tyler, if you just go to the slide previously. Oh, next one. So what our early findings have found through this HUGS review is really supporting the growth around growing from the central city out and planning for that growth. So you can see here it's about these three key themes with the corridors, that's aligning with the transport business case work and making sure that we're growing in the right places to support those transport outcomes. And the new neighbourhoods one is about actually really continuing to invest in the enormous amount of, I guess, growth areas that we've already got underway. So the Rotokoldi, the Peacocks, the Ruakura areas. And then I think, as we'll talk about in the PX reports, how we respond to emerging areas. So I think that's aligned with what we've heard from councillors' direction to date. And yeah, as Stafford says, if you've got any questions, please come back directly through to Stafford. All right.
Yep, that's great, thanks. So look, I'll move the staff recommendation, those the report covering those two items be received, seconded by Councillor Sarah. Those in favour raise their hands, please. Against, that's carried, thanks very much. Councillors, we're on to the resolution to exclude the public, which I'll move. Councillor Robb seconds. Those in favour raise their hands. Against, please. We'll wait for a minute or so to throw out all the extraneous people that we've got. I don't know, have we got any extraneous people?
I can't see you.